Mr. President, thank you for the recognition, and Senator Merkley, thank you very much for your yielding. And I have been here on the floor listening to Senator Kaine, Senator Merkley. I saw Senator Cardin from my office earlier, and I think you can see that many of us that sat through these hearings and heard the answers, it didn't give us a lot of confidence that Rex Tillerson was able to step in and be the top diplomat for the United States of America. So I join in many of the comments that have been made earlier. And I want to talk a little bit about one of the issues that's developed in the last couple of days that I think really has bearing on this. You know, for the last century, the United States has led the world stage. We are the inspiration for countless nations as they nurture hopeful democracies. Democracies that respect human rights and individual liberties. We're a nation of freedom where men and women can work hard, build a happy, healthy life, live the American dream. And that is what makes President Trump's anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant actions last week so repugnant. I believe his actions violate the Constitution. They also violate everything we stand for as a country. Turning our backs on refugees and those seeking a better life doesn't project strength. It shows weakness. It fuels anti-American rage around the world. Our nation doesn't punish innocent people because of what they believe and who they pray to. We don't slam the door in the faces of those who need help the most. And I call on all of us, especially my colleagues across the aisle, to denounce this action and the people behind it. And I'm relieved that federal judges around the nation are blocking the president's unconstitutional order. And I'm also very proud of our strong constitutional system of checks and balances. And I can't tell you how proud I am of Sally Yates, the acting Attorney General, who was fired by President Trump. Now, you've got to know something about her. This is a very courageous person who stood up and did the right thing. Sally Yates is a career prosecutor. She served as a U.S. attorney in the U.S. Attorney's Office under Democrats and Republicans, career prosecutor. She received, when she was put up for a vote here in the Senate, she got 84 votes in the United States Senate when she was approved for Deputy Attorney General of the United States. So this is someone who understands what's going on, understands the Constitution, and understands her legal obligations. And she stood up and said she wasn't going to represent in court the president on this Muslim ban, and he fired her. These kinds of actions are disturbing. They're un-American acts. And they're the most urgent reason I rise today to say that I cannot support confirming Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State. Mr. President, there's no doubt that Mr. Tillerson was qualified to run ExxonMobil. Exxon was his first job out of college and the only company he worked for during his 40-year career in the oil and gas industry. And there's no doubt that Mr. Tillerson, as CEO and chair of ExxonMobil, was 100% committed to making sure the best interests of the company's shareholders were served. But with no diplomatic experience or history of public service, I'm not confident that Mr. Tillerson is qualified to serve as the United States chief diplomat. And after studying his work and studying the history and his responses at confirmation hearing and looking at his answers in writing, I do not believe that Mr. Tillerson is able to commit 100% to serving the best interests of the American people. Negotiating the complexities of oil and gas deals is not the same as negotiating the complexities of treaties and agreements with foreign governments. ExxonMobil's top priority is profit. That is its reason for existence. Leaders negotiate business deals over money and access to resources. The United States, the American people, have different priorities, sometimes conflicting priorities. Our nation is economically successful, for sure. We value business and we value making money, but our core values go way beyond economics. We value representative government, we value human rights, we value freedom of speech, we value the four freedoms that President Roosevelt talked about, and that we entered into international agreements to spread the four freedoms around the world. And the incoming Secretary of State should not be learning on the job. He or she should already have substantial, relevant experience. He or she should already have proven experience fighting for our nation's core values, for human rights. Mr. Tillerson made it clear during his hearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that he lacks substantive foreign policy experience and knowledge. He told the committee many times that he was not familiar with the issues at hand or needed briefing. He must have said that a number of times. And just one example, Mr. Tillerson was unfamiliar with Russia's role in the indiscriminate slaughter of civilians in Syria. He had no opinion of the legality of the slaughter under international law. These are some of the most important, most urgent foreign policy matters we face, but he was unprepared to answer them. Like senators on both sides of the aisle, I'm concerned that Mr. Tillerson's close personal business ties to the Russian government. I'm concerned about those. They may color his view of Russia. He has been long friends with Vladimir Putin. He has a highly profitable relationship with Igor Sechin, the head of the state-owned oil company Rosneft. I worry that these ties make it difficult or maybe even impossible for him to objectively evaluate Russia's actions and to act in America's best interest. Are his close ties to Russia why he does not condemn Russia's actions in Syria? We cannot be sure. Mr. Tillerson also will not confirm whether he will advocate maintaining sanctions against Russia for invading Crimea. We know that the sanctions also continue to cost ExxonMobil because it is not able to drill for oil in Russia's Arctic. Will Mr. Tillerson not commit to maintaining sanctions because of his ties to Russia? We cannot be sure. And a third example, Mr. Tillerson would not commit to sanctions against Russia for its interference in our presidential election. He said he didn't have enough information. Well, every U.S. security agency, all 17 of them, has concluded that the Russian government hacked the Democratic National Committee, disclosed emails from the hack, from getting in there, and tried to influence our election. They agreed that these actions were authorized at the highest levels of the Russian government, with fingers pointing right at Vladimir Putin. And the intelligence community's public reports stated it this way, and I'm quoting now at this point. We assess Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election. Russia's goals were to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton, and harm her electability and potential presidency. We further assess Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump, now President Trump. We have high confidence in these judgments. So 17 of our intelligence agencies pooled together all of their information. They had high confidence in what they concluded there. Mr. Tillerson had adequate information to make a strong statement against this attack, against this hacking, and in favor of American democracy. He did not make such a statement. We must have a Secretary of State whose allegiance is 100% committed to U.S. interests. Mr. Tillerson's equivocating testimony on Russia did not convince me that he can be counted on to serve America's interests and Americans' interest only. Mr. Tillerson's equivocations mirror the Republicans' record on Russian interference in our democracy. While the president has plans to dismantle the post-World War II international order, Republicans have done nothing to address Russia's attempt to dismantle our democracy. Mr. President, I was also unsatisfied by Mr. Tillerson's answers on climate change. While he acknowledges the existence of climate change, he testified that, and I quote, "Our ability to predict that effect is very limited, and what action to take seems to be the largest area of debate existing in public discourse," end quote. That's not what the overwhelming majority of scientists tell us. Our ability to predict what is happening to the planet's climate is not very limited, and there is international consensus written into the Paris Agreement what actions nations agree they must take. Scientists from all over the world have joined together through the United Nations and said, climate change is real, we've got to take specific actions. I appreciated that Rex Tillerson had at least said he believes the United States should remain at the table, but he questioned a key part of the Paris Agreement, the nationally determined contribution, or what is called the NDC. Without the NDC from the United States, the agreement is likely to fall apart, and his claimed support for the Paris Agreement becomes meaningless. I cannot be clearer. Ignoring the threat of climate change is a direct threat to the United States. You've heard other senators talk about the threat to their states, and it's a direct threat to my home state of New Mexico. And while President Trump may be trying to quiet our climate scientists, the science is clear. Climate change is real. We just finished the hottest year in recorded history. We know we must act, and we know there will be devastating impacts if the United States does not lead on this issue. Mr. President, no matter what you believe about science or foreign policy, we should all be alarmed at the lack of transparency in the new administration, especially the unwillingness of our president and key cabinet members to be open and honest with taxpayers about their finances and potential conflicts. While Mr. Tillerson has divested from ExxonMobil, we still don't have copies of his tax returns. Mr. Tillerson's ties to ExxonMobil are decades old, yet he has said he will recuse himself from matters related to ExxonMobil for only 1 year. Only 1 year will recuse himself. Worked for this company his entire life. He should refrain from taking calls from his old company for as long as he serves as Secretary of State. He's serving the country. He's serving in a taxpayer-funded job. I don't understand why he cannot agree to this simple standard to avoid the appearance of any conflict. If he deals favorably with ExxonMobil, how can the American people know he's working for us or for his former employer, who made him an extremely wealthy man? But most concerning to me, Mr. President, is whether Mr. Tillerson will be able to speak truth to power. We have just seen this weekend how vital that will be in this administration, where it appears that there is no unifying vision and different factions of President Trump's cabinet are competing for his attention. We need a leader with a clear vision for America's role in the world, someone who will put American values ahead of everything else. Too many times when pressed during his confirmation hearing about U.S. interests and values, Mr. Tillerson did not give straight answers. On questions such as human rights violations in the Philippines and Syria, he did not call out these offenses for what they were. On questions whether we should maintain sanctions against Russia for illegally invading Crimea or for interfering with our electoral process, he deferred, he wavered. He said he would decide at a later date when he could be briefed or meet with the president. If Mr. Tillerson can't give straight answers from the heart about the most pressing human rights issues, on violations of international law, on a foreign power's interference with our presidential election, how can we expect him to speak up and temper the worst angels in the Trump administration? If Mr. Tillerson were the nominee for a more conventional Republican president, these concerns would not be as serious. But I think every senator can agree that Donald Trump is not a conventional president. He is offending allies and upending alliances on a nearly daily basis. He has made negative statements about the German chancellor's domestic policies. He's threatening to extort the Mexican government to pay for an offensive and ineffective wall on America's southern border. He has repeatedly questioned NATO, the fundamental alliance that has secured peace between major powers since World War II. He is threatening to slash funding for the United Nations, including the World Health Organization, which fights global pandemics. While addressing employees of the Central Intelligence Agency, standing in front of a wall honoring professionals who have made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedoms, President Trump threatened to take Iraq's oil, that he wanted to take another look at taking Iraq's oil. And he said, and he had this in a quote, "To the victor go the spoils." This is a line attributed to Julius Caesar, who decreed himself emperor. He began rattling the saber with China before he was sworn in. The president has done all of this while repeatedly praising Vladimir Putin as a strong leader and proposing to improve relations there while making them worse nearly everywhere else. And this weekend, he closed Americans' doors to Muslim refugees, trying to escape the very evil our government is fighting against. He not only closed the doors to people who believe in our democratic institutions and the freedoms we enjoy, he closed doors to people who have risked their lives in service of our ideals. These are not normal changes in foreign policy between administrations. I would change many aspects of U.S. foreign policy if I could, but President Trump's approach to foreign policy so far is one of reckless change that is frankly scaring the American public and our allies around the world. In such a foreign policy environment, we need experienced, skilled hands, people who understand these allies, that understand our long-standing alliances and why we have them. But the president has fired all U.S. ambassadors, and the most high-level State Department employees have resigned or been forced out. Mr. Tillerson, there's no doubt, is a talented businessman. He loves his country. He's devoted himself to other worthy causes like the Boy Scouts. It's no exaggeration to say that the post-World War II international order is under attack by the president, endangering U.S. leadership in the world. As a result, our national security and place in the world are threatened like never before. During such tenuous times, we need a leader as our chief diplomat who is prepared to take the reins and calm the waters. But I do not have confidence that Mr. Tillerson has the experience, knowledge, values, or temperament to stand up to the president, to be a voice of reason, to moderate the president's extreme views and actions. For these reasons, Mr. President, I oppose Mr. Tillerson's confirmation as Secretary of State, and I urge my fellow members, including those who claim the mantle of President Reagan, to do the same.